Our marriage was starting to fall apart before I even realized it. Back then, everything seemed great. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 6 of them. During that time, we had 2 beautiful kids. I was the main provider in the household, and she was the homemaker. She decided to quit her job and focus on the kids and home, which seemed like a good idea to me. At first, it seemed like we had a great balance. But then, little cracks started appearing in our relationship. They were so tiny at first, like little misunderstandings. Then we started arguing more and more often over little things: what to make for dinner, who was picking up the kids from school, who was taking out the trash. These arguments didn't seem like big issues, but they were happening more and more frequently. It felt like the tension was rising every day. One night, after work, I walked in and saw her sitting at the kitchen table. She was bent over her phone, not even noticing me come in. I just stood there, watching her face. She looked so serious, like she was talking about something important. I felt a weird sense of unease, like I'd never felt before. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. She jumped, looking up from her phone. "Oh, hi," she said, putting it in her pocket. Her voice was a little off, like she wasn't really there. "How was your day?" Her response was short and generic. It was like my being home wasn't a big deal. I sat across from her, feeling like there was an invisible wall between us. "You okay?" I asked, hoping to break the silence. She looked at me, but her eyes were cold. "Yeah, I'm fine," she said. Then she got up and started doing dishes, like she wanted to get away from me. Then I decided to let it go. I was exhausted from all the endless arguments, those conversations that went nowhere. But there was already a feeling inside me that something wasn't right. Weeks went by, and our conversations became more and more brief. She seemed to be withdrawing more and more, like her thoughts were somewhere else. One evening, after I got home later than usual from work, I found her in the kitchen. This time, she wasn't talking on the phone. She was just sitting there, staring out the window with a blank expression. I noticed her eyes looked a little puffy, like she'd been crying. "What's up?" I asked, trying to figure out what was going on. She didn't answer right away. She was looking off into the distance like she was thinking hard about something. "You know," she said finally, "I'm not sure if I'm happy." I was totally caught off guard by what she said. My stomach sank. I never even thought that she might be unhappy in our relationship. I thought we were doing great. I take care of the family and pay attention to the kids. What more could anyone want for happiness? "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. Her voice was soft, almost unsure. "I just feel like something is wrong. Everything I do feels pointless. I've lost myself, and our marriage seems to have lost its meaning." She stopped speaking, and I felt my throat tighten. I tried to think of something to say to make her feel better, but nothing seemed right. Instead, I just walked over and put my hand on her shoulder. She tensed at first, but didn't move away. "Let's talk about it," I suggested, hoping a heart-to-heart would help us sort things out. "I don't feel like talking," she said in a harsh tone. She got up and went into the bedroom, leaving me confused. That was the start of our slow drift apart. In the following days, I tried everything to get back to the old closeness. I organized family dinners and trips to the park, but she only showed cold indifference. She was there, but it was like she was a ghost, like her mind was somewhere else, with someone else. One night, when I was falling asleep on the couch, I was spending more nights there now, I heard her quietly talking on the phone in the other room. Her voice was soft, but there was emotion in it I hadn't heard for a while. I didn't know who she was talking to, but my gut told me it was more than just a normal conversation. It was deeper, something I couldn't understand. Every day, my anxiety was getting worse. I started to notice that she was leaving the house more and more in the evenings. She'd say she was meeting friends or going to the store, but there was something different about her eyes. A hidden glow that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I tried not to worry about it, but my mind kept playing out the worst-case scenarios. A few weeks went by and then, what I was most afraid of happened. She got home late one night and I was sitting there in the dark when I heard her steps in the hallway. I turned on the lights when she walked in. She jumped, not expecting me to be there. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to sound calm. She avoided my eyes and said, "With friends." "Really?" I couldn't help the sarcasm. "Friends? She stopped, like my words surprised her. Then she sighed and sat on the couch, staring at her feet. "You don't get it," she said quietly, and there was a weird mix of exhaustion and determination in her tone. "I can't keep doing this. I'm miserable, and everything we try feels pointless." "Do you mean you want to break up?" I asked, not really believing what I heard. Her words felt like a punch. "I don't know, but I'm considering it." The silence after her words was deafening. I sat across from her and the world started to crumble around me. The cracks I'd been ignoring became a chasm, swallowing everything in its path. I was up all night long. Her words about the divorce just wouldn't stop ringing in my ears. It was like an echo, bouncing around in my head. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, feeling cold and scared. The idea that our marriage could end was just too much to handle. We'd been through so many things together, and it seemed like everything was falling apart. I tried to tell myself it was just a phase, that she wouldn't really go through with it. But deep down, I knew her words were serious. The next day, I acted like nothing had happened. I made breakfast, took the kids to school, went to work, but I was a mess inside. Every thought just kept bringing me back to the previous day. I did my job on autopilot, but I couldn't focus on anything. When I got home, my wife was gone. I guess she picked the kids up from school on her own, because judging by what they told me, they were with their grandma for the rest of the day. That was weird, because she usually doesn't leave them with their grandparents unless it's absolutely necessary. A wave of anxiety started to rise in me again. Later that evening, when the kids were already in bed, she came back. I was in the kitchen, staring at a cold cup of tea, when I heard the door open. Her steps were muffled and unsure, like she wasn't sure if she wanted to be there. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, and went to meet her. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to sound calm. I didn't want this to turn into another argument. She stopped in the doorway like she wasn't expecting me to be there. Her face was all tired and worn, like she'd been thinking about something all day. But there was a determined look in her eyes that wasn't there before. "I just needed to take some time to think," she said, trying to cover up the fatigue in her voice. "I can't be here anymore. In this house." "What's going on?" I asked, getting a little impatient. "What's wrong with you?" "It's just too complicated," she faltered. "I know we could have done something about it, but I just can't do it anymore." I went closer to her, but she backed away. There was something about her movements that made me feel more than just her words. "Talking?" She gave a bitter smile, like she didn't really believe me. "We've been talking for years, and what's changed?" That caught me off guard. A wave of desperation washed over me, but I had to stay calm. I knew if I lost it, it could all go downhill that night. "I'm just trying," I started, but she cut me off. "Are you trying?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "And me? Don't you think I try? Don't think I don't want to save our marriage?" "No, that's not what I mean," I rushed to say, but it was too late. She was getting more and more worked up like a storm. "You're always working and leaving me alone. I feel like I don't matter. I can't take it anymore." My chest felt like something had snapped. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. In that moment, we were at the edge of the cliff and one wrong move could send us tumbling down. "I don't want things to be this way," I said, keeping my voice low. "I really want everything to go back to how it was before. I want us to be happy." She stopped moving, her face changing. There was a look of indecision in her eyes, like she was wondering if she should keep talking. "I do too," she finally said quietly. "But I don't know if we can make it happen." The room was silent. I stood there, not knowing what else to say. Words seemed pointless, like they couldn't fix anything. "Maybe we should see a professional?" I suggested, realizing it was our last shot. A family therapist could help us sort things out. She looked surprised, like she hadn't expected that idea. But then she softened and thought for a second. Her voice was soft, but there was hope in it when she said, "Maybe that's our best option." I nodded, feeling her words warm my chest. Maybe this was the start of saving our marriage. A few days passed and we agreed to see a therapist the next weekend. As the appointment got closer, I got more anxious. What if it didn't work? What if we were really done and nothing could fix it? Friday night, the night before our appointment, She came home later than normal. I was worried when I heard the door. Her steps were quiet, barely audible. I walked out and saw her by the mirror. She seemed tired, but there was a new light in her eyes, a spark I couldn't quite understand. "How was it?" I asked, trying to gauge her mood. She turned and gave a small smile. "It's okay," she said, not saying where she'd been. "Just a long day." I walked up to her and put my hands on her shoulders. She didn't move away, but she also didn't react to my touch. "We're seeing a therapist tomorrow, remember?" I said, trying to convince both her and myself. She nodded, but there was something distant about her voice. "Yeah, I know." "It'll be okay," I said, though I didn't sound very convincing. The next day we got in the car and went to the appointment. We were both quiet, lost in our thoughts. Neither of us wanted to break the silence, but it was suffocating. I was full of hope and fear. Hope that we could find a way to communicate, and fear that it might be too late. When we walked into the therapist's room, she sat across from me, and for the first time in a while, I felt like there was an invisible wall between us. She asked us some basic questions, but after a few minutes, it became obvious that we had a lot of pent-up emotions. We started to talk, and with every word, the tension built. I saw her struggling to hold back tears, and it was hard for her to express how she felt. I tried to explain how I felt too, but it all seemed so complicated. Then, at some point in the conversation, she just blurted out, "I feel like I'm losing myself. I don't know who I am anymore. But maybe I've found someone who can help me figure it out." Her words were like a shock. I was stunned, not believing what I was hearing. Everything inside me just stopped. I felt like the ground was slipping from under me. A million thoughts raced through my mind, but I couldn't speak. The therapist was talking, trying to turn the conversation around, but I wasn't listening anymore. Everything around me seemed to freeze, and I was just stuck with those words that I'd never forget. She wasn't even looking at me. Her eyes were somewhere else. I knew she'd made her decision, and it wasn't about me. The silence in the room got so heavy. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there. All I wanted was to leave, but my legs were glued to the chair. It had been a few weeks since that session, and the tension at home was getting worse. She kept talking about finding someone to help her understand herself, and it kept playing on my mind. I tried to push it away, but every time she went out, I felt like she was going to him. The situation was getting unbearable. We were barely talking, and we tried to avoid each other as much as possible. The only thing that kept us together were the kids. For their sake, we tried to pretend like everything was okay, but deep down, I knew it was over. One night, after the kids went to bed, she came home late like usual. I was waiting for her in the kitchen. I heard the door lock click, but this time, I didn't get up to greet her. I just felt empty, like I'd already accepted what was coming. When she walked into the kitchen, she stopped in the doorway and noticed me. We looked at each other for a second, and I could see the exhaustion and some kind of decision in her eyes. "We need to talk," she said quietly, like she was scared to break the silence between us. I nodded, motioned for her to take a seat across from me. My stomach was churning with anticipation, but I tried to stay calm. Thinking about what she was going to say was unbearable, but it was also inevitable. "I've been giving it some thought," she started, fiddling with the edge of her jacket. "I was thinking about us, our marriage, the kids, and I think we need to make some decisions." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. Anxiety was bubbling up inside me, but I knew I needed to hear her out. "We can't keep going like this," her voice wavered, but she kept going. "I tried, really tried, to make the family work, but it's not fair to either of us." She seemed to struggle with saying those words, but they were filled with determination. In that moment, it was clear that it was all over. All our attempts to save our marriage had failed, and now we just had to face it. "Do you want to go?" I finally asked, not being able to hold back the question that had been bugging me all along. She nodded quietly, and I felt something inside me snap. It was the worst thing I was afraid of, but now it was real, and the pain had faded, replaced by a strange sense of relief. "Who is he?" I asked suddenly, not taking my eyes off her. Her eyes went wide in surprise, and there was a flash of panic there. "What are you talking about?" She tried to play dumb, but her voice gave her away. "You think I didn't notice?" I continued, feeling the anger I'd been holding back building in my chest. I saw the way you were different. I saw you leaving in the evenings, talking on the phone. There's someone else, isn't there?" Her silence was the most powerful response I could have gotten. She didn't deny anything, didn't try to make excuses. She just sat there with her head down, and that silence spoke louder than any words. I closed my eyes and tried to calm down. My emotions were bubbling up inside me, but I knew if I lost my cool, it would only make things worse. "Just tell me the truth," I finally said. "I deserve that much at least." She sighed, and I saw a tear slip down her cheek. "Yes," she said softly. "I started seeing someone a few months ago. He understands me in a way no one else does. I didn't mean for this to happen, but it did." Her revelation was like a kick in the gut. I wasn't sure how to feel: anger, hurt, disappointment. All those emotions mixed together into one overwhelming feeling that I just wanted to run away from. "And now what?" I asked, trying not to let my emotions show. After a pause, she said, "I'm going. It's for the best for all of us. I can't keep lying to you guys anymore. I want to be honest." These words sounded like a final sentence. I knew her decision was made, and there was nothing I could do to change it. She stood up from the table and started to walk away, but then she stopped and turned back to me. "I'm not saying I'm sorry," she said softly, her eyes full of sadness. "I just want you to understand." I didn't know what to say. My mind was too confused to come up with anything smart. She left the room, leaving me there with my thoughts and shattered hopes. The next day when I got home from work, her stuff was gone. She had taken everything that was hers, leaving only a brief note on the kitchen counter. It said, "I'm gone. I'll see the kids." No explanation, no excuse. Just a cold, professional message like our marriage was a contract she had broken. Weeks passed and life slowly returned to normal. I was starting to get used to being alone, the empty rooms, and the silence that was only broken by the occasional sound of kids. We kept in touch for their sake, not saying too much. Every time I saw her, though, something in me would turn over. There was no guilt or sadness in her eyes. She seemed calm and even happy. I, on the other hand, was broken, but I tried not to show it. One day, everything changed. I was working late and the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there he was, the man she cheated on me with, standing there, looking at me with that weird expression on his face. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly, like he was afraid of disturbing my world. I wasn't sure what to say, anger and surprise fighting inside me. But I nodded and invited him in. Once we were sitting in the living room, I asked, "Why are you here?" He looked a bit unsure, like he wasn't sure how to start the conversation. Finally, he let out a sigh and said, "I came to tell you the truth. You need to know what really happened." I stared at him, confused, not sure what he meant. A million thoughts ran through my head, but then his next words hit me like a ton of bricks. "Have you ever wondered why she left you?" I was speechless, waiting for more. He continued, "It wasn't because I was better than you, and it wasn't because she stopped loving you. It was a form of revenge. Revenge for not being there when she needed you most." Those words rocked me to my core. I couldn't believe all this time, her actions had been driven by resentment and pain that I had never noticed. "I did love her," he said, "but I always knew she wouldn't love me like she loved you. It was just how things were meant to be. She left, and now I realize it was the wrong decision. Maybe you can forgive her, maybe you can even forgive yourself." And with that, he was gone, leaving me there with the truth I'd been trying to avoid for so long.